Hi there, Jake here again.
And it's James again.
Let's talk about the beginning of day 78 because what we shipped was fairly straightforward. Henry listening to the tape recorder of the previous night's conversation. But in earlier versions of Firewatch, this was a lot more complicated. This was actually the day, or this morning was when Henry would discover a bunch of Brian Goodwin's stuff. His like peachy folder full of scribblings and homework and stuff was actually wedged into a drawer under Henry's desk, and he'd hit his head and it would fall out at the start of day 78 or earlier. Actually, we really liked the idea that players and Henry could find it at any time in the game up until this point, but it ended up creating this complete nest of madness, which you had to animate.
Yeah, because of these permutations of have you found the folder or not, and then needing a failsafe at a certain point to advance the plot along, there were lots of different versions of getting the folder. And it was very complicated as well because we were tying it into things like getting the cave key at the same time as getting the folder. And the animation itself ended up being like pouring through tons of documents because it was like a postcard and his homework and like physically opening this thing, which ended up being a little bit silly because you realize we've already built systems whereby you can pick objects up and inspect them. So why are we forcing like 4 of those in a row in a cutscene? So I must have done probably, 5 or 6 pretty distinct versions of this, and then we cut it completely.
The folder falls out. The folder falls out, but then you pick it up, and then you read it, but then you found the keys. But what if you dropped the keys and then find the folder? Oh, man. Yeah. It was one of the biggest reliefs for me when we cut this and just put all of the folder stuff where it belongs in the world and the keys over on the backpack permanently. I was very worried that you would be sad that it was cut because it was so much animation work, but I feel like you were also relieved that it was finally just dead and buried and a superior version shipped.
Yes. The only thing I was ever sad about was we had a nice little interaction where you would grab keys, and for the first time in the game, a pickup would like fail, and you sort of fumble the keys, right? And they go under the desk, which I always liked that animation. But what I will say is this. I have been making a Firewatch reel, and all this kind of stuff that got cut, I'm including it in the reel now, so I finally get to have my cake.
Rude.
Something I like that came on a little later in development that you did, Nels, here is we are without the radio, and I like how that feels across like the broad swath of the game. I think it's really cool to not just be alone. But there are these sort of reflexive Henry comments to himself based on things you're looking at, and the way those are tuned throughout here are really nice. Player, I don't know if you've seen this, but when you're walking sort of in the upper level of the cave, you can look down and to the right and you can see Brian Goodwin's shoe. And when you sort of like zoom in on that, Henry will just call out to someone if is someone down there, is someone in the cave. And Nell sort of like concocted that and put them all in the game. And we wrote some lines that worked for it. And they're not all over the place, but I really like the way it made the cave feel.
Yeah, it's actually kind of one of my favorite moments in the game in terms of Henry's monologue too, because we conceivably, even though Delilah can't hear you, like we could have hooked up the same normal radio interaction to where like you could make these dialogue choices and Henry just either monologues to himself or like talks into the radio, even though we know Delilah can't hear him. But I don't remember. I might just like tried it on a whim. Maybe someone suggested it. I don't exactly remember. But just having those play automatically when you've been looking at a specific object or area of the cave for like anywhere between like half a second to 2 seconds, and then those kind of monologue moments show up, or when you perform a specific action like zooming, it feels very natural in a way that like little kind of auto monologue lines in games often don't. There's like a couple in the upper level of the cave and then a couple more down near the bottom when you actually find Brian's body. It was kind of a bummer that they came online so late and there aren't any other spots in the game where Henry doesn't have access to the radio, because I actually would have loved to have a few more of these in the game somewhere as well.
You're always thinking about like what design tools do I have to like change the pace or make you feel something different. And I don't think we realized they were a club we had in our bag until we'd sort of like laid the whole game before us, and we went like, oh, yeah, we really like these. Oh,
I know.
And Rich did such a good job performing them. It was just, yeah, they really work for me in the game.
Yeah, they're quite good.
Hi, it's Jane again, here with
Me, Jake. Hi.
So the way we work usually is that Jake will do a lot of the level design with gray boxing, and the cave is no different.
That's true. The cave is no different in that regard, but it is different in that it's ridiculous. Like the cave, Firewatch usually, when you're building it, you only have to worry about the floor, whereas the cave is a completely contained area. Like it's it's a cave. And I really wanted to take advantage of that, perhaps to an excessive degree. Like I really wanted the cave to feel like this snaking labyrinth that wove in and out of itself, and that you could see areas you were going to get to later from places you weren't at yet and stuff. But I had no idea if it would actually be allowed to exist inside of the rules of Firewatch until I handed it to you.
Well, the interesting thing about this cave is that, like, for example, this hole where the shoe is, you can actually see all the way down to where the body is.
Yeah, you can't
It's
quite
all
see the body because
interconnected,
you can't lean far enough in. But yeah,
but the spaces all are actually connected in a way that makes sense.
the cave is also actually exceptional in that I think it's the only place in Firewatch where we cheat space.
Yes.
There's a couple places in the cave where you drop off a ledge, and in the middle of Henry's drop animation, we just cut the camera and like blink you to another area that's like a few hundred meters farther away.
Yeah.
Because the cave ended up being so weirdly nested on itself. It ended up being this like compact ball of yarn to the point that it didn't actually get you all the way to Brian's hideout.
Yeah, and so like to like make the space make sense while not spending too much time making it, we just decided, hey, I guess by cheating it a little, it's okay. And I don't think people actually notice.
It also cuts your travel time down. Like people were spending a long time walking through it in the early version of the gray box. But
figuring out how to light the cave, because like video game lighting, yes, but you still have to make sure there are spots opening up to the sky so that because we need to make sure that Henry can go through this without a flashlight.
Right. But it's also nice and dramatic to have those little cracks of sunlight coming through.
Yeah,
It looks
that's
nice.
fun.
But like, think about those torches.
Yeah, that's true.
Spike walls.
Or underground lake. How about that?
Almost happened.
Almost made
Don't
it.
tell people about the lake.
Hey, it's Chris again.
Hey, it's Sean.
The entire Brian Goodwin saga changed absolutely massively, multiple times, really, over the course of the design and writing process. There was actually a previous design revision in which you, as the player, through just various means, could like trigger the discovery of the like existence of Brian Goodwin much earlier in the game, and we had to allow for like all these different possible branches of when you could find that out and when Delilah would tell you more information and so on and so on. And it became like a nightmarish possibility space that we really had to rein in.
It became just a very unwieldy story.
Yeah.
Inside of that story was the idea that Delilah didn't know who Brian Goodwin was.
Right.
She knew Ned Goodwin. He was a lookout who was out here, but did not know that he was here with a son because it was against the rules, and Ned had broken the rules by bringing his son out here. And from a design side, that was not to mention there's the unwieldy nature of the being able to never find out who he is until the very end, or figuring out that there was a kid in your tower on day one. That was unwieldy. And then, furthermore, we were running out of tools to communicate the story of Brian Goodwin because they were the only thing we had was the discovery of objects, which felt very one note and very.
It felt very like breadcrumby.
Exactly.
Like, oh, there's all this information you have to know in this order, so you're gonna find these things in that order, and there were too many of them, and it felt completely contrived.
And this is just a design philosophy. I think this is like a good story design philosophy, a good mechanics design philosophy. When something just isn't working, is just ask yourself what happens if the opposite is true. I'll just say, okay, so what are the things that are true? Delilah didn't know there's a kid in the tower. I was like, well, what if she did? And not only did she liked him. Oh my gosh, well, that makes the emotional payload of finding Brian Goodwin like much more intense. And then once we had that, we had another design tool to like communicate about who Brian Goodwin was to you.
And that tool was the one tool we had for communicating information
anywhere else than finding something. And Henry going, we doubled the amount of information we could get to you, and it just made the game much more easy. It opened up the game from a story side, and it made us not have to constrain ourselves with that branching craziness of not knowing who he was and breadcrumbing you around the world.
And in doing so, it sort of simplified that total arc and allowed us to pack a lot more information into each of those deliveries. So when you find Brian's backpack, when you find his hideaway, each of those is like very information dense because we just consolidated it all to those zones.
And can reference the stuff you've learned along the way. So when you
exactly.
do find him, you actually feel like he's a human being who had a history and a life and a personality and stuff. And I'm really glad we got there.
Yeah, me too.
Because we got there late, and you just
Very
don't
late.
know if it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You just don't know. We got there August, September-ish of 2015.
yeah.
Game came out in February 2016. So very, very, very late.
Hey, it's Patrick and Nels here.
Hello.
You may have just found some role-playing game artifacts owned by Brian Goodwin, and I thought we could talk about the ways that this character evolved and actually ended up incorporating a lot of elements of our own super nerdy childhoods.
Oh, yes, that's exactly right.
Like Gladius Silva here, it was...
Good old Gladius Silva was actually the very first D&D character I ever made in probably grade 8, maybe grade 9. My very first D&D campaign. Some other friends of mine on the speech team, the speech and debate team, asked me to join their game, and I was very enamored that they invited me. So I had to make a cool character. So I made a half-elf ranger, and because I was a giant dorko and taking a Latin class at the time, I named him Gladius Silva, which of course means sword of the forest. And I remember when we were initially talking about, like giving Brian kind of this geeky kid personality to contrast with the fact that he's like out in the middle of the wilderness. And I recounted this anecdote about Gladius Silva. Everybody in the office thought it was quite hilarious. And because I had, for my own edification a while back, rescued that character sheet from like my parents' garage and then scanned it, I was able just to send over a PDF of that scanned character sheet. And then it more or less showed up exactly in the game.
Yeah, these are probably your original die rolls from that faded first campaign.
Oh, it was modified just the tiniest bit to like avoid Wizards of the Coast's Dungeons and Dragons copyright. Otherwise, that is literally just my dude. My favorite thing about Brian's proclivity for tabletop RPGs is in Henry's Tower in Two Forks, you can actually find a map that Brian made that's basically like a D&D-ification of the whole area that you're normally in.
Yeah, I ended up drawing that completely based on my own style of drawing when I was Brian's age. And Nels' age. When he was Gladius Silva, I was a city kid who moved to a more like suburban, like woodsy area at that age in my life. And I was so shocked to have all this like actual like woodsy terrain around me that I started mapping it with pencil and paper and, drawing little legends just like Brian did, kind of turning the area into more of a mythical landscape. So as soon as this character had gelled, I knew that he would see Two Forks this way and that cash boxes would be treasure chests and the Boy Scout camp would be a halfling village. And so it kind of just wrote itself.
Yeah, totally. That is our tiny tidbit of geek history in Firewatch by way of Brian Goodwin's Gladius Silva.
Hey, it's Chris again.
Hey, it's Sean, and you are in a clearing just beyond the body of a dead elk. And nearby, there's a cassette tape from Dave to Ron. I get them confused the way I get like lots of pairs of characters confused and things that I didn't write.
Yeah.
It's a recording of the song Allhoshone as performed and composed by Chris, who's sitting here, but as written by as performed in the fiction of the game by
Ron or Dave.
Based on the lyrics that are discoverable in the outhouse
Rest.
at Hawk's Rest, that were written by Raccoon Carter. I wrote the song as lyrics, and then the whole Ron Dave saga I left for myself till later.
You wrote those lyrics before we actually had the idea of making it a real song in the game.
Exactly right.
Yeah. That whole arc collided with a totally separate design idea, which was to have a like a non-diegetic piece of music that was playing on top of the game at a particular moment. We really liked the idea of that generally. Have an actual song with singing and lyrics in it punctuate a particular moment. but we just never really landed on a song that we thought worked or a particular way to integrate it into the narrative that like wasn't going to stomp on the open nature of the game, and it just kind of we just sort of languished for a while until I guess it was your idea. I can't even remember.
I remember it being my idea only because I remember being really bashful about it because it was like I had never written a song before and I really, really, really wanted you to compose music and record it. But like I was worried that it was bad and also like making your friend and coworker do this thing that you wouldn't tell me it was a bad idea. I was worried you wouldn't tell me it was a bad idea.
That's so funny because I read that as like you just didn't really.
Oh really?
I read that as like, oh, you can do this if you want, but I don't know if that's.
No, I just didn't want to like. It felt like so I've read a song and you're gonna perform it.
Right.
Like it just did not feel like I was like, oh, so I was really like feeling that like. Then when you delivered it, I would like start crying. I was like alone and just like got like welled up, and I was like, oh man, that feels good. And I was really
so
excited.
Fun.
To play
I was really happy to get to do that on the game.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
It was really
I didn't
fun.
know that.
Yeah.
Well, great.
Yeah, worked out.
And it's available on the soundtrack, which you can buy at thestore.camposanto.com or from our Steam page.
Hi, it's Jake again.
And Chris.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Jake. This area is one of the only areas in the game where we really let ourselves play up sort of dressing a set in a really overtly theatrical and dramatic way. You know, this is the reveal of Brian's body was such a big moment that we kind of figured we should just go for it entirely.
It was possible to do because I think this is one of the only places in Firewatch where the direction from which the player approaches and the time of day are 100% in our control. Like, you're only ever going to see this scenario under this circumstance. You're going to walk in and sort of the scene will reveal itself from this angle, and there's no chance that the sun is going to be setting in the middle of it or whatever else. So we leaned into it.
I kind of ran with that with the music as well. As you know, if you've listened to all the music in this game, I really didn't lean on big string swells or anything like that. It's very kind of small scale recordings, you know, guitar and electric piano and bass and things like that. I decided to just push this as far as possible. I did one odd thing with the music, which was instead of what you'd expect, which was making the music a really minor dark key, it's actually all in major, which is typically what people associate with happier, more upbeat music, but I pushed the strings far enough that I was hoping it would sort of come around the other side and make something that's kind of, I don't know, poignant. So
it's cool. I like it.
Thanks.
Fun fact about this area, if you bring a notable Brian Goodwin possession down into this space, you can set it down next to him using the game's putback system.
One Russian streamer found that live on like the day the game came out.
Yeah, by accident, and it was
amazing.
That guy's stream blew up.
Yep.
I came up with this character Delilah and then just thrust her upon you and said, you are going to be Delilah in this video game. I liked working with you on The Walking Dead. You were amazing as Katya. How did that character come to life for you?
Well, actually, I think her name was Alice at first, if you'll recall.
Oh, no, it was.
You remember that?
It was Alice. Oh, no. What a hilarious thing to have to remember.
I remember getting that email from you about, hey, I'm writing a game, female protagonist, are you in? And I didn't even have to think twice about it. I knew whatever you're working on, whenever, throughout history and time, I will want to be a part of. But then you sent me the sides for Alice, and I got to read about this beautifully flawed but fun and self-engaged woman. And it's one of the things I love about the characters that you write is that they're actual people. They're not tropes. They're not stereotypes of anything. They're full-bodied people. And so I got to dig a little bit into my past and what's made me tick and what would make me take a job in the middle of nowhere and shamelessly flirt with somebody over a walkie-talkie and build her from there. The wonderful thing about Delilah is that there's actually a lot of me in her, meaning like I grew up in Idaho. There are a lot of mountains and wildfires and solitude and stuff like that. I left and I moved to Los Angeles and now I'm surrounded by concrete, but I kind of started out in the same place.
I was integrating so much of the way you speak and the way you like tell a joke or laugh just back into the character. Do you feel like you had to create that stuff to be Delilah, or were you making a concerted effort to sort of like become her?
I think it's a little bit of both. I am a bit of a smartass, and so a lot of the stuff that you wrote really lent itself to that. But as we started getting into the puns, wouldn't you liken to know and stuff like that, I was able to kind of sit back into this woman who just doesn't give a shit. She's out there in the middle of nowhere and having fun because this is her life. And so having that freedom to just be an idiot, it was really freeing. It was a lot of fun.